conspiracy theories, right? So theories which are probably immune against any empirical evidence and which often operate with the assumption that there is a powerful elite or let's say a grand mastermind in the background that latently puts in place certain let's say grand plans that can explain large-scale phenomena. So this is the second problem then of the representational account that it is prone to invite the invention of these power elites. Therefore, a second account of functional statements is called etiological, and etiological accounts ask why and how did X come into being, or why does it persist? And the basic idea behind the etiological account is, according to Jon Elster, whom I cite here, to reduce basically functionalist statements to a particularly complex kind of causal analysis, where here an institution or behavioral pattern X is explained by its function Y for group Z, and then if and only if, so it's necessary and sufficient conditions. So Y is first of all an effect of X, and Y is beneficial, Y is an unintended consequence in producing X, and now comes the particularly functional feature here defined as a causal analysis. Basically, by producing and reproducing a certain function, then this very institution becomes reinforced, if you want. So let's go back to our education example here. Education causally produces stability in society, say. By doing this, by exercising its function successfully, it in turn stabilizes itself, right? So there's a feedback loop of it fulfilling its function successfully on its very persistence. And Jon Elster, who is a rational choice social scientist, right? So someone who is really in favor also of individual level kind of explanations and against, let's say, any strong metaphysical claims about, let's say, functions operating beyond causality and beyond the mind of actors, offers this explication of functionalist statements in causalist terms with the intention of, let's say, reducing it also to a purely individualistic, first of all, and then second, causalistic kind of statement. So a third account of functions may be called dispositional. And we already saw above that there's a certain similarity between dispositions, such as the fragility of glass, and functions, with the basic idea being, or the basic question is, what is the contribution then of a certain function X for a certain goal? And it's basically easy here to then borrow some of this dispositional vocabulary to analyze the capacity, right, of a certain institution to stabilize a certain goal as an outcome. And here also the functional or the analytic definition by Cummins. Last but not least, a final account which I personally find quite appealing can be called the fictional account. Why fictional? Because function descriptions of the type X has the function f to Y for Z, they may not refer to anything such a category as a categorical property of an object, right? And they may be also hard to agree upon, but they may be useful cognitively and epistemically because they help us guide sort of our understanding of institutions in societies. And even though they do not explain in the very same sense as, for instance, causal explanations do, they open up also interesting as if counterfactuals. So they allow, for instance, to put oneself in the position of a social planner who thinks about how to stabilize societies. So and then just this very functional goal can offer fruitful comparisons of so-called functional equivalents. So institutions which are functionally equivalent in supporting the goal of stability in society. And this allows, I think, interesting new comparisons of institutions as diverse as, for instance, religion, the welfare state, the education system, because in one way or the other, they may all serve the goal of stabilizing or not society. Yeah? And this is not to say then that my functional description that these institutions have the function to stabilize society is necessarily true or not, but it allows me to open up sort of a horizon of comparisons which I wouldn't have had without this functional vocabulary. And I personally find this fictional account quite appealing because it, in a way, comes without a lot of ontological or metaphysical baggage, right? It's not very, let's say, cumbersome. You don't have to think about society as an organism. You don't have to presuppose that functions really exists independently of us ascribing it. But they sort of rescue, I think, the epistemically interesting function that functions actually have, which is to open up quite interesting comparisons. Okay, so these are just four different accounts of how to make sense of functionalist statements, quite different in nature. Every account has certain merits, I would say. Every account has also several problems in capturing these five sort of implications or prerequisites that are often associated with functionalist statements. But yes, so as a general understanding of what function statements then mean, including in the social sciences, I think this is helpful as a way of thinking about it. So let's move on then to sociological functionalism in the sense not only of a fictional account of functions, but in the proper sense of a grand theory of functionalism. And this is Talcott Parsons' functionalism. Parsons, whom you see here, is a 20th century American sociologist who was also trained actually in Germany in the 1920s and wrote already an interesting thesis there about capitalism in German sociology, where he mostly reviews Werner Sombart and Max Weber's writing about capitalism. Then returned to the United States, he soon becomes a faculty member at Harvard, and for the period of more than 30 years, he is probably the most important sociologist and theoretical sociologist, and establishes something like the Harvard School of Sociology, characterized mostly by its theory focus. Then Parsons developed First of all, a theory on social interaction that was also linked to the reading for today, and then moved on more and more to a theory of social systems in his later life. Not too fun fact is that Parsons died on a trip to Germany, actually, and the older generation of professors here at the Freie University of Berlin had actually listened to his sort of last lectures he gave in Heidelberg and then Munich before he died. So a background of Parsons' theorizing is obviously the structural functionalism that was established as sort of an organicistic kind of functionalism by Malinowski and Durkheim in the 19th century that Parsons also reviews in the text you read for today. And the basic idea behind the structural functionalism of back in the day was to just analyze society as an organism along the different functional problems, right? So the main problem being obviously the problem of societies to become properly integrated. And Malinowski in particular used then these functional problems in order to collect empirical material about the different solutions that societies, tribes, small groups then developed in order to solve the functional problems. And this then, as I mentioned, allows the use also of comparing functionally equivalent kind of solutions to functional problems. One important background condition also for Parsons is his acquaintance with Freudian theory, so the psychoanalyst from Vienna, who, Parsons found interesting also for his analysis of small group dynamics. And also for his theory of the superego and the id. One other background is another Harvard sociologist, contemporary of Parsons, George Homans, whom we will briefly encounter also as one of the proponents of a rational choice theory and thinking about social action in terms of economic cost benefit kind of choices. And Homans became famous also for doing empirical studies of the dynamics that occur in small groups. So in a kind of psychology of smaller groups, if you want. And this was interesting to Parsons in particular for analyzing this problem of social interaction that we will turn to quite soon. So here are then some of the main works of Parsons, the structure of social action. This is like the early Parsons, where he develops an analytical theory of action, of social action. And the second later Parsonian work, which is also important, is The Social System, 1951, and then in an extension again, 1975. Where Parsons does, in a way, a system turn, where it's not any longer sort of social interaction situations, but sort of institutions and entire systems that become the basic unit of analysis. And in the 1970s, also, he extends this theory by adding evolutionary theory as kind of the theory of change of social systems in addition. So as you may recall, when you look a little bit for the legacy of Talcott Parsons in sociology and beyond, then Parsons is the case of a sociologist whose the interest in whom becomes more and more historical, I would say.